Oh, okay. To begin recording your conference, press 1. Please stand by while your recording connection is established. To cancel the recording, press *2.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all colleagues that are joining us today. I am Susana Sottoli,
Recorded.
Associate Director, Cross-Cutting Areas in the Program Division, Headquarters, New York, and on behalf of the Human Rights Unit, I am delighted to welcome you to the part 2 of our webinar series on accountability. As you may recall, last month when we met for part 1 of this webinar series, we discussed and exchanged views on the role of national human rights institutions in the monitoring process of the new Sustainable Development Goals. Today, we are focusing on a more informal accountability, namely people-led accountability or social accountability, and how it can and must be linked to the SDG accountability framework, relying on civic engagement, meaning that people and or civil society organizations participate directly or indirectly in exacting accountability. This type of accountability mechanisms complement the more traditional forms of accountability, generally comprising state-coordinated judicial mechanisms and institutions. Supported with various information and technology tools, social accountability mechanisms empower people, both by providing vital information regarding their rights and by amplifying their voice in public affairs. We are looking forward to an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. And before getting started, just a few housekeeping issues that will help you going smoothly through these webinars. We request that colleagues joining remotely please mute their microphones. You are welcome to post questions throughout the panelist presentations and the Q&A session by using the message feature as much as possible. Please limit your questions to 1 or 2 sentences, as due to the limited time frame of the webinar, we may otherwise not have sufficient time to review and respond quickly to your questions. The panelists will do their best to respond to all queries, and we will make sure to circulate the Q&A in follow-up to the webinar, responding to any questions we didn't get to. We are delighted to have with us today an exciting mix of experts with both global and country-level perspectives. We have here with us in New York, Olav Kjørven, Director of Public Partnerships, UNICEF Headquarters. Pleasure to have you here. 2 colleagues from Restless Development, Victoria Forsgate. She is the head of global policy and practice. We have as well George Titus Epudu, one of the coordinators for the Big Idea Uganda, sitting in Uganda. We have also Charlotte Oernemark from the World Bank's Global Partnership for Social Accountability. And we have Paul van Ufford, Chief Social Policy, UNICEF Zambia. This is a great panel. We are looking forward to the discussion, and we will start the presentations with Olav. He has been, from his capacity as UNICEF's Public Partnership Division Director, has been with the whole process leading to the SDG agenda. And he will start us off with a global perspective, explaining to us the significance of the 2030 agenda, how its development was a historical inclusive process, and how this inclusive participatory process can and must continue in its implementation. Over to you. Thank you, Olav.
Thank you very much, Susana, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to engage in this favorite topic of mine, which is around people-led accountability for the work that we do in the UN and in UNICEF. And as I point out as often as I can, the first words of the UN Charter read "We the people," right? We the people of the United Nations, not we the member states. And this unique global body, built on the foundation of universal norms and values, is, when you think about it, actually, in its nutshell, a global accountability mechanism to the people. It is the instrument, it's the global institution that is there to ensure that governments are accountable to we the people. That's why it exists, plain and simple. And as you said, Susana, we have reasons to be very, very proud that with the development of the new global and universal Agenda 2030 for sustainable development, that dimension of accountability produced through the engagement by millions of people around the world was a key ingredient to help deliver this unique and ambitious agenda at a time when getting agreement in an era when getting agreement on anything sort of at the global level is exceedingly difficult. We're hoping that there might be an agreement today or tomorrow or the next day in overtime in Paris on climate change. That would be fantastic as well, but we know how difficult this is. But when you do have a real opportunity for people to engage in a policy process, then that is when you build the kind of pressure that will help make it more painful to walk away from a difficult deal than to clinch a difficult deal. And now, of course, it's our hope that we, the people, will also find a way to be at the center of implementing this agenda, and this is what we'll talk about. How can we ensure that this powerful channel of accountability can also be alive and kicking and vibrant and play a role in making sure that we can actually implement this agenda, because it's no good unless it's implemented, obviously. So next slide. So just very quickly remind ourselves what we mean when we talk about accountability. First of all, it is the ability to make certain that those charged with protecting and fulfilling human rights actually do what they're supposed to do. And if they do not or cannot, that people and their representatives have some recourse. I think that's kind of, in a nutshell, plain and simple, what it is all about. There are, of course, different types, two main types. The formal, and Susana, you talked about that, this through courts and ombudspersons and parliamentary committees and so on, and the informal and unofficial, which relies precisely on we the people, civic engagement. And today we are discussing that. We're discussing the informal, unofficial accountability, or social accountability, which is in which people or civil society organizations participate directly or indirectly in enacting accountability. Turning then to the SDGs. We are, of course, in UNICEF delighted with the result of this 4-year process to elaborate these goals, because there's so much to celebrate for children. There is increased level of ambition when it comes to the goals the themes that were already in the MDGs. There are new themes of direct importance for children, such as combating child poverty, reducing inequality, and protecting children from violence and exploitation and abuse. And in addition to that, there are, of course, new goals covering areas such as the environment, sustainable consumption production, inclusive economic growth, sustainable urbanization, and migration. These are incredibly important topics for children and future generations, although they're not necessarily the kinds of goals where UNICEF as such has traditionally played a role. It's not like we're going to spread out and do everything across all the goals, but they're fantastically important goals for children. And these goals, as I said, they're truly the people's goals, because people around the world played a direct role in shaping the discussions that the negotiations that led to this. And let me just point out some interesting facts and figures. A Nielsen poll was done shortly after the adoption of the new agenda. It showed that more than half the population around the world is at some level aware of the SDGs. That's astounding. And if you think you would probably not get much higher if you did a poll about awareness of the MDGs, even after 15 years. But already people have heard about that there's something new called the SDGs or global goals or whatever, and they have some idea as to what it's about. We've also been able, through partnership, to reach out to children in over 160 countries, probably reaching around 500 million children through the partnership we have with the world's largest lesson and with ministries of education, which has helped us get child-friendly material about the SDGs into schools around the world. They've been embraced by governments at all levels, of course. All governments have signed off, but also, luminaries such as the Pope. And the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, has declared that New York is going to implement the SDGs. You have Mark Zuckerberg, who came to New York and offered a very, very significant pledge that he has since followed up by announcing this $45 billion organization that he's setting up. David Beckham, and I could go on and on. This is quite extraordinary. And then if you look at the area of business, I was very struck to see that the International Chamber of Commerce brought the SDGs, the famous circular, colorful logo, into their own logo on their website. Now that tells you something, that business wants to be part of this as well. And I've also had the pleasure of doing something I'd never expect, which was to go to the New York City Comic-Con to launch UNICEF's partnership with Comics United Nations, which is a partnership that aims to use the comics medium to reach young people in particular, but children, young people, and whoever reads comics out there with stories about why these goals matter. And those stories are starting to go out there, and we're extremely excited about that as well. So in a way, the SDGs, to sum up, they're already a movement, and they're everybody's business. We need to build on that. We're still early days. We want to build that movement and make it very, make that movement strong around the world. And that is why we have this webinar, I think, to talk about the different ideas that we can put in motion to build this movement for action and for accountability. There is a mandate in the outcome document of Agenda 2030. It's, I can almost get teary-eyed from reading these words. I guess I'm a kind of a UN junkie after all. But it is very, very beautiful when you read it. In the opening declaration, member states have noted that millions have already engaged with and will own this agenda. It is an agenda of the people, by the people, and for the people, and this, we believe, will ensure its success. So, what does it mean in practice? It means, I think, two fundamental things. It means that people around the world need to become aware of the issues articulated through the SDGs so that they can take actions, both big and small, in their personal lives, in their communities, in their countries, to make progress on the goals. But it means also that through that awareness, they will have the tools to, and the space to monitor progress and provide feedback on whether the goals are making an impact on the ground, whether governments are actually following up or doing something, whether whatever is being done is working, and so on and so forth. So it's about taking action, and it's about monitoring progress. And of course, accountability is mostly about the second aspect of this. Now, operationalizing these beautiful words will not be easy. It's a massive agenda and will only be achievable through the daily actions of many. It's not something UNICEF or any other stakeholder group can deliver alone, and it's not something governments can do on their own, the private sector, or civil society. So partnership, coming together across the different constituencies will be the glue for implementation, including when it comes to building people-led social accountability. And I'm really looking forward, I'll stop shortly, to hear examples from the presenters today. Excited about the people we have with us on this webinar. Let me just, however, give 3 very quick illustrative ideas before I end. Many of us in UNICEF are very much aware, and we're proud of UReport and Rapid Pro, and for good reason, I believe, using SMS text messaging to get feedback from our UReporters, mainly children and youth. We currently have over 1.8 million users across 18 countries, and it's grown rapidly the last few months. And in addition to official data collection channels like household surveys, civil registration systems, etc., this people-generated and people-led perception data approach should and must be used. And we are very keen to look for opportunities to build on this model and see how we can scale it up in terms of creating a true movement of accountability for results in all the areas where we work as UNICEF to advance the children's agenda across the SDGs. And somewhat related to this, we hope, this is my second point, that we will be able to work with the telecommunications industry as well as other partners in the private sector and in civil society to establish a really robust global platform to allow millions of people to take part in tracking progress. I mean, we can offer UReport as a huge contribution to such an effort that can be scaled up together with other contributions from others. But the vision is really a we the people's track for tracking implementation along these 15 years that we will now have in front of us. This is at this point very much at the idea stage. We are engaged in conversations with some telecommunication companies, and we're hoping soon to have a more structured discussion around this with several companies and the GSMA, which is the global association of this particular industry, and then we'll see where it goes from there. A third point to keep in mind, and this is really important, it is that it's not we can't make this all about technology, because by doing so we basically leave too many people behind. There are too many people in the world today that are still not connected, and therefore we have to find ways of connecting also people that are not technologically connected to this we the people's social accountability movement and agenda. And there are ways to do that, relying on more traditional approaches to generating input, to generate voices of people into this process. And we need to combine the offline and the online, the high-tech and the low-tech in order to make this work for everybody. I'll just end there, I think. Maybe just a quick closing thought. As I mentioned, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla have recently launched this multi-billion-dollar initiative to advance human potential and promote equality. In his opening letter, which at its core calls for investing in children and future generations, they explicitly note that, and I quote, "We must engage directly with the people we serve. We can't empower people if we don't understand the needs and desires of their communities." And what this means is that social accountability is not merely an ingredient of the new agenda. It is fundamental for its success in creating lasting and sustainable change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olav. Your last words will keep resonating with us throughout this webinar, because this is the key of the matter here. Let's go to Victoria and Titus. Victoria, can you hear us, Victoria? Victoria? She's sitting in London. Bear with us. She might have her mic muted. Victoria, are you there? You can hear, but are you muted? Let's try with Titus.
Titus, could you unmute your phone, please? Titus, can you hear us? Great, Titus. Yes, Titus, you can hear us, right?
Yeah.
Victoria, it
Yeah,
seems
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Victoria, can you hear us in the meantime?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay. So then, Titus, we're just going to start with Victoria. We'll be turning to you in the next few minutes.
Thank you so much, Victoria and Titus. Victoria, we will start up with you in your capacity as head of global policy and practice of Restless Development. Among other things, you have been leading the conceptualization of the big idea, which is Restless Development's flagship data and youth-led social accountability initiative. Perhaps you can start by sharing with us the concept, and then we will go to Titus for a more view from the field, so to speak. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation for Titus and I to join the webinar today. Yeah, we're very, for Restless Development as an agency really has youth-led accountability for the SDGs as one of our biggest priorities. Really over the course of the post-2015 process, we've played a very active role in supporting young people to participate in shaping the process, but also increasingly around shaping the accountability mechanisms and ultimately crafting out very practical roles for how young people can participate in holding their governments accountable. As you see, Titus is currently leading the big idea in Uganda, and I'll leave him to describe in much more detail what that looks like in practice. But at the broader level, the concept is how young people can use this increasing access to data, in particular open data, and develop their capacities to use that and drive accountability at the local, national, and ultimately global level. But in addition to that as well, I think this stretches much further to kind of broader practical recommendations about how young people can participate in accountability more widely. And as an organisation, we're launching a paper on that in January. But I think at this point, I don't want to say too much of what Titus has prepared for this morning. So I think I'll hand over to Titus, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Victoria. Now on to you, Titus. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Victoria, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone in the webinar. I'm happy to participate with you people. So I'm happy to say that actually the project, which is actually a model for youth-led accountability. Victoria, maybe you can take us. Yeah, the Restless development is a youth-led development agency, like for Uganda. We have been supporting youth group programming in Uganda for over 15 years. And just in case you want the details, you can find it on the slide there. You can see the website for development for more information. Briefly, I would want to be more sharing more through the big idea project, which is youth-led. We're using the data-driven for the SDGs. Currently, we're piloting this in Ghana, Tanzania, and Nepal. But I would like to focus much of my efforts in Uganda, where I'm currently leading the project. So we are saying that the young people are using the data and information to hold decision makers accountable, like they account to the local and the global level on development issues that affect their lives. The young people actually receive the information, and they want to use the evidence data for making sure that the decision makers use that information for making decisions actually based on that information. The other is that the young people actively presenting the findings from their consultations and asking the decision makers to make commitments in line with their actions. Actually, we continue to find that whenever all the institute work in this meeting, we find that the young people have a presentation, and then while down there in their presentation, they make advocacy act. So these are the ones which we confirm the duty leaders which we want them to come on. We find also that the people we are very happy that sometimes people get excitement and make commitments, but do not happen to work on them. So the young people follow up on the commitments and make sure decision makers give feedback on progress made towards them. But of course, I'm happy to say that we work in partnership with the EU reporters and the UNICEF help always in decision making information whenever we formulate sessions. UNICEF also shares with the other EU reporters the relevant topic and the specific of operation. We are looking at Victoria. Maybe you can flip to slide 3, where we're looking at how does it work. We're saying yes, accountability can be made better by young people in partnership with the district leaders through one of the use of the EU reporters. We say that reporters provide lots and lots of information from the big aspect for those people who have the funds, and we believe that this can be a student data which can build a stronger kind of advocacy for decision makers who decide on issues to do with the young people. And then the other one was how does it work? But building together youth-led research. This is where we recruit the researchers from the specific areas of operation whereby these people have a very good dialect in terms of language, and so that you are able to write by asking and get the right information from the community. And that is just in terms of making sure we build the capacity of the young people, make sure they engage with the decision makers. We have the district leadership. When we say the district leadership, we say that yes, the young people might be issues, they'll be able to discuss them, but without the leadership of the district, that may not be happening well. But at this point in time, we're happy to see that actually we engage with the district leaders and make sure that they are also contributing on issues pertaining the young people, and that can be more something which can provide like provide sustainable solutions for both the young people and the children. The other one we will have also working is the use of the district working group meeting, the platform where like the young people directly engage with the decision makers, they present their findings, and then the decision makers are made in line with the advocacy actions the young people would have come up with. I mean, that this is this has been happening, issues are shared, and valuable commitments are made. Yeah. So the other one is data translation, which is also key here, is like whenever we go out to do research, we look at some of the documents, like for the district, like the work plans, the local government development plan, and then we have also like the youth, like national youth movement kind of documents, which we know, documents everyone like has agreed on that these are their like work plans or activities they want to work on, but sometimes they things on the paper, but then they don't come to pass in terms of implementation. So we can everything we take the topics and also say that relevant kind of thing has been shared on this. So you ask them in line of what they have committed in the document. Then the documentation of paper, we share that the first that it's important only to have information to protect so that it gives a clear evidence on issues affecting children and the young people. So we can take us to achievements. So far, we have realized in Gulu since September 2015. So when we look at achievements, we say that there has been increased information and more transparency on services. This was directly given like a first possibility to working group meeting, in a short term, but they were able to provide us valuable evidence from like the leaders, able to come back and give us feedback on the commitments they made on their past district working group meeting, which is quite interesting and makes some of us believe in the project happen. The other one they talked about the local organization strengthening. The district talked about organization and alcohol, not that most of the issues are driven by alcohol. For things like hygiene and sanitation, issues of people failure to make the school fees and so forth, most of them target to issues of overconsumption of alcohol. So the district say that I think we should strengthen on the local ordinance to do with the issues of overconsumption of alcohol, which is quite so good as a commitment and as well as a feedback that things are happening. We're also very happy to hear feedback on news resource corners available, functioning and providing news-friendly services, which is quite so key. We're so key in terms of what youth-friendly services. We find that useful corners may be available, but they are not providing a youth-friendly service. If they do and be married by the district official, then that's quite so key. And we're so happy with the district speaker for Gulu when we was sharing the meeting, when we have the district youth working group meeting, when we were saying, you know what, we would want to implement the district youth working group meeting, let it be championed by the leaders. And that's what something we're so happy. That is such kind of a long-lasting platform, like is put in place, and quite a number of issues are asked, and that's quite like something which makes us quite so good. That is it. In conclusion, I would want to say that the big idea project has actually been quite so good for some of us and the leading, because you really see that most of the voices of like the young children have been heard down there, because you can like in terms of our participation, the focus group discussions we do at the community level, we also involve the young children in that focus group discussion of around 14%, I think before, but there's an equal presentation. So what the young children not like at least select where actually are able to voice their concerns, voice of what is like happening in their life, and that kind of voices are continuously being like right from the district leaders. So that is quite so good to hear like the children participate, and we're quite sure that in case this kind of a project continues, then there are going to be a great changes in the community, because right in the community people are talking, and they are also making commitments in line with the issue which has been like shared with them. So that is it in terms of the big idea project.
Thank you, Titus. That was really an excellent illustration on how social accountability, in this case youth-led social accountability, actually looks like, and how really can be key in achieving development results. You were very comprehensive in sharing with us this big idea in Uganda, and we are happy that UNICEF is actually partnering with you to move this agenda forward. We will definitely go back to that because your presentation also make a connection to one of the main aspects of Olav's presentation, the data technology, young people's participation. But now let me invite Charlotte from the World Bank Social Accountability, Global Partnership for Social Accountability, Charlotte Oernemark. Let me check whether Charlotte is there. Can you hear us, Charlotte?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly clear. Thank you. Charlotte will introduce us to the GPSA, its work, and how it intends to contribute to achieving accountability for the 2030 agenda. Let me briefly say that UNICEF has been member of the GPSA, joining about 2 years ago this platform of partners working around the various aspects of social accountability. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, and thanks for including us in today's session. In the interest of time, I'm going to go straight to the World Bank president.
Yes, we're all set. Thank you, Charlotte.
Right, and just to say something about why GPSA was created, for those who don't know, it came about in 2012, when the World Bank management really wanted to increase its efforts to scale up engagement with civil society organizations on how to improve institution building for better in-country economic governance. Since then, it has somehow grown a little bit in scope, but what we're really trying to build is a sort of community of practice connecting, if you like, the World Bank operations to the outside world, the outside interest in the social accountability, and really to look at the how of doing a development in a sense. So trying to see how can we sort of use the bank leverage to actually get involved and get the social accountability mechanism strengthened on the ground, using on the one hand the World Bank leverage mechanism in relations with government to respond, and on the other hand strengthening and directly supporting civil society organizations on the ground. So as you will see, the World Bank has not been so instrumental or so active, I suppose, in framing the SDG discussion, as you know. But now there's a really increased interest from within the institution, also in trying to see how then do we do this so that we can actually contribute also to the SDGs in implementation. So we organize every year a forum, a partners forum, where we gather about 250 or so partners, 260 I think. And then President Kim said that the real challenge is now to spread and scale and fundamentally change the way governments and the private sector work through citizen feedback and social accountability. And this is very much in line with the bank, which has a new framework, all bank projects that have beneficiaries, identifiable beneficiaries, have to now include some form of citizen engagement to make sure that there is a feedback mechanism in place. So as GPSA, we are also trying to, if you like, be a resource within the institution, within the bank, in pointing to what are some of the mechanisms, what are some of the innovative ways of doing this, both through tools and technology, but also through the way civil society work on the ground and can both identify the marginalized and fill some of those gaps and make sure that you actually have a more complete feedback in the reform processes that are being supported. So if we flip to the next slide. Just very briefly then, where and how do we work? Well, we have as GPSA, as I said, we are set up as a trust fund within the bank. So we do grants to civil society, and at present we have about 23 ongoing projects in 17 countries. But we just had another call for proposals, global call, so we expect another 10 or 15 coming on board very soon. And the way this works is that countries actually have to opt into this mechanism. They have to formally from the ministry say that it's okay for the World Bank to fund civil society there, and then the country office also agrees to this. This is important because once we have that seal of approval, they are then not at all involved in the selection process, but it means that the government have sort of given their agreement to have citizen monitoring in a certain sector, for instance, that wins the call, and that leaves us the ability to use that leveraging mechanism for them to actually respond. Because, of course, being strategic about social accountability and knowing also from rights-based perspective, it's also about governments actually responding to this feedback. And this is also where the partners usually have the most problems. So we have, in addition to the actual grants facility with civil society grants, which are funded by foundations or bilaterals or even in parallel funding through some of the philanthropic foundations. We have then the learning component and the partnership component, which was referred to just now. And there we have about 260 partners across 64 countries. It's government, civil society, mostly grassroots movements, and private sector as well. So it's a wide range of partners, but the common theme and agenda is how do we actually advance the thinking and share and draw on each other's strengths on how to advance this agenda. We have a knowledge platform also with about 1,800 users, so we try to post and link to any new information coming up in this area and really try to sort of get some traction in this thinking. I referred already to the Global Partnerships Forum that we have, and also that we try to even more now that we get into the implementation after 3 years to really look at how we can not just support our partners in the field, but really try to influence bank operations more broadly. So just on the next slide, which says DPSA in country. It shows, I'm sorry about this very confusing slide, but it's almost meant to be that way because we want to illustrate that, of course, it's not very easy to really get the accountability systems in place. And we believe very strongly that you have to have a multi-pronged approach and really try to work across civil society and other non-state actors if possible. For instance, we have trade unions as grantees, we have socioeconomic partners as well as more traditional NGOs and national NGOs. So really to work with the civil society and other non-state actors as a means of trying to link this broader citizen-generated monitoring, learning and action into actual government dialogue. And we put a lot of emphasis on this idea of constructive engagement through co-creation of solutions. So any grant that we support, for instance, would clearly how to state a particular governance or public service delivery problem and how they intend to actually work with government and what government incentives are to actually address this, so that we have a really defined way of trying to have a co-creation of some solution of better tackling the problem, which also can help them to align the data needs that governments may have to what citizens or to what CSOs can provide by linking to various citizen networks. But we also try to link this into the horizontal accountability institutions that you had talked about in your previous session. So, and here we really put emphasis on how to work with, we do trainings with grantees on how to work with the NHRIs, how to work with the audit commissions, the anti-corruption commissions, etc. And of course, children's ombudsman, if they exist, either on their own or as a subset of an NHRI. So we specifically have linked up with the part in the bank that works a lot with parliaments and accountability mechanisms and try to encourage those CSOs who haven't yet had those relations to include that in, again, to strengthen the whole system of accountability around a particular sector reform. And then, of course, the last box in the left is really to say, okay, but then there's also the World Bank. the idea of placing GPSA inside the World Bank rather than having it somewhere else, so that the spin-off was to try to link in then with the broader bank operations, which would be a way of trying to ensure that there's scale also involved and not just separate small projects. The projects, I should say, are fairly large. They run over a minimum of 5 years, because we also realize that in all this, it takes time to really get the mechanisms in place. If you just flip to the next slide, this is just to show that what we do really inside this is to try to close those feedback loops inside those accountability systems and gain some knowledge and ideas on how to do that, so that we really learn and adapt, and so that these systems are complex, and we have to actually try to see how we work with grantees to make them learn in the process and not just follow a very preconceived linear way of implementation. Next slide will then go into a couple of examples in this. Just to give you an idea, in Moldova we have a project with in the education sector. Most of our grantees, actually, of the 23, we have about half of them dealing with education sector reform, and about more than half even looking at health sector, which is directly, of course, relating to the outcome of child health and education. So in that sense, there's an obvious and clear linkage here between us and UNICEF's work. So in Moldova, for instance, there was a very active, a very ambitious national reform of the education sector that was pushed through. It almost received some backlash and criticism because nobody was really consulted and the mechanisms were not really in place to do that. So the Ministry of Education actually had a problem and others were unhappy. Now, this grant, then, the grantee came in, the expert group in Moldova came in and tried to work on setting up more interactive school boards, of have a stakeholder representation in the process, and to actually make this information about the process and about school education sector performance available then to students and parents. And this actually led to a new regulation being pushed through that the schools must involve students and other stakeholders in school ratings as part of this reform process. So I think it's important to highlight here, because it's a way of trying to, from a fairly small interaction of trying to get the engagement mechanisms in place. It led to regulation that gives the children and students a much more legitimate voice in the process. It also led to, from having been very criticized, the ministry got a lot of attention from this and positive feedback, and was even awarded with a social accountability award by the World Bank here in Washington last year. So it's gone. So they could really see the benefit of actually involving citizens in this process. Just the next slide. Another example comes from the Philippines, where the grantee is taking on a very traditional top-down, if you like, process of cash transfers to the poorest, and trying to make this an empowering initiative. This is a sector that has been World Bank financed for a number of years, almost 10 years. But there were plenty of problems of it being very top-down and not very owned by people themselves. And of course, the conditions there are that the recipients of this cash should put their children in school and keep track of that, and also take them for regular health checkups. But the compliance was quite low, because it was a very sort of controlled way of just doing that to get the cash rather than owning that process. So the CSO and the network of CSOs in one province have tried to a different approach, where they put people and parents themselves in charge of monitoring then the health outcomes and the education attendance and of their children, and that is what's also on the picture there in the process of filling out the forms. They do that every month, and they get help to do that. But it's them bringing the data, it's them owning the data, and they have their own facilitators that they choose, that they select parent leaders that help them do that as well. So it's kind of trying to take a top-down process, if you like, and tipping it around to make it more empowering for these people, and it's significant because it's increased the compliance with 20%, meaning that 20% more of the recipients actually, made sure that the children went to school and went to have health checkups. So there's a substantial gain there for children on the one hand, and on the other, of course, it is very scalable because just by doing it differently, this program goes out to 4.4 million of the poorest in the Philippines. And if this model then can be taken up, because it's implemented together with the ministry, that could, of course, have much larger significance. So those are two very different examples, if you like, of how grantees work that might be relevant. So just the next slide. Can social accountability work for children across the SDGs? Yes, I mean, this is an area that we think is very interesting because it's, as I said, we have many of the grants in those sectors that directly affect children. So, of course, we will look at SDG 16. It's very interesting, of course, across the board, but we also think that you could really apply this to any of the SDGs, if you like, to make sure that the outcomes are actually better for children and also voice in the process in trying to work around citizen-generated data as a legitimate source of information. And if I just take the last slide, so how can GPSA contribute? Well, first of all, I think it's another entry point, right? As I said, the World Bank has not been so active around linking public sector performance to the SDGs, but now this is becoming a very interesting agenda for the World Bank, and the Vice President for United Nations here and SDGs is really interested in this, and we work closely with that office, trying also to be a resource, really, to see how this can work on the ground, and how you can actually spread and scale and pulling in the same direction by working across the civil society, state divide, even with the private sector. Sometimes we have on the more technical solutions. But also to think a little bit on how child rights governance really fits with the SDGs across. Because if you have this system approach to social accountability that we try to promote, of course, setting up that system could really benefit more of a child rights oriented governance system. And really to learn around the how of doing this, how to actually generate this citizen-generated data, how to give it some validity and weight by using, the leveraging mechanisms that we have, and to have an open discussion on how this can complement other sources of data. I think is also something that we will actually have as a key topic in our next steering committee that gathers various governments and civil society together. So I think that for us was really interesting, and we hope to work with UNICEF as a partner of GPSA on this in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Excellent presentation. Another two great examples of the concrete ways of working at the ground with social accountability ideas. And I would like just to briefly highlight a very important issue that you were making, a point that you were making, how we need to connect the various modalities of accountabilities in order to improve the overall governance that ultimately would lead us to better results. Let's go finally to Paul van Ufford, Chief Social Policy with UNICEF Zambia, working on social protection, child poverty, and public finance for children. Paul coordinates the partnership with Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, a Zambian NGO, and UNICEF supports this organization, deepening accountability programs and focusing on expenditure tracking and service delivery monitoring. Paul will briefly present some lessons learned in relation to this program. Glad to have you here with us, Paul. Are you there? Can you hear us well?
Yes, I can hear you well. Greetings from Lusaka. Can you hear me?
Perfectly clear. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Susana, and thank you for the opportunity to share some experiences from Zambia. So I will give a very brief overview of the program, and then I would like to raise a few issues that maybe potentially contribute to the discussion we will have after this. First of all, before starting, I would like to really confirm the relevance of this type of work for a country such as Zambia that has very high poverty rates, including for children, very high levels of deprivation among children, but there's also the potential to reach children with the services that can address these deprivations, but it's not happening. And one of the factors in the analysis of why it is not happening is that policymakers and frontline service providers are not held to account in relation to their responsibilities, and that there is no space for citizens to express themselves vis-à-vis the quality of the services that they are entitled to. And for instance, budgets do get allocated, but maybe they do not get spent. Services may be available, but they will not be delivered. They are not delivered with the adequate quality to make a change in the lives of children. So basically, this is the analysis that our partner, Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, used to design a deepening accountability program that has been implemented since 2009 and since 2012 with the support of UNICEF Zambia. So the program, as you said, this specific social accountability initiative focuses on budget tracking and service delivery monitoring in 6 sectors: education, health, social protection, agriculture, water and sanitation, and infrastructures, which were identified by the partners of our of the NGO we work with as representing the key sectors where this initiative would work best. It is implemented in 10 communities in 5 different provinces, which sort of represent the diversity you will see in rural Zambia. And it uses 2 key and relatively simple tools that we call scorecards. There is a budget tracking scorecard and a service delivery scorecard. And the budget tracking scorecard starts by highlighting what a particular community is entitled to in terms of budgets or in terms of in-kind transfers, entitlements. Very simple things as how many new desks the school in the community is entitled to. How many textbooks per child is the community entitled to in a particular year? The community uses the tool then to track how many of these textbooks and how many of this infrastructure was actually delivered. So that is the budget tracking tool. The service delivery scorecard is used by the citizens in the community to rate the quality of the services they receive. So for instance, with regards to health services, the tool rates the attitude of health staff. It rates the management of the health facility. It rates the quality of the services in terms of supply of drugs. Is the equipment adequate? And it also rates the services in terms of whether there is actually equal access to health and there is no discrimination or no preferential treatment. So our partner, civil society, has local presence. They train community groups to administer these tools, and through these tools, this information is collected and used in meetings, in dialogues at different levels. In the first place, the information is used to drive what we call interface meetings between citizens or service users and frontline service providers. And that is the first level happening in the community. There is the second level of engagement, which happens at the district level, where representatives from the community discuss the findings from the tracking exercises and the service delivery monitoring with the district officials, and together they formulate recommendations that will be discussed in subsequent interface meetings at the community level. So there is also the partner then itself develops more aggregate reports that are discussed in the province and even at the national level. And in recent years, some of these aggregate reports, which they call barometer reports, are also discussed in Parliament and within the Ministry of Finance. So in a nutshell, this is the program, how it looks like and how it is implemented. And then I wanted to continue to highlight a few lessons or issues that we struggle with or that we have learned as we implement with our partner this program. So the first is the significance of the partnership with the Ministry of Finance in a few regards. So the first is that the Ministry of Finance actually authorizes district officials to release budget data, which, as I explained, is really at the core of the budget tracking. So in that way, the partner and the communities know which budget was requested, what was allocated, what was actually disbursed, and what is spent. And that is a very important basis for the tracking. We also sort of learned that the Ministry of Finance is not only in this way a facilitating partner, but it's also a very interested partner. And of course, I think it's not surprising that ministries of finance are very open to the notion of money well spent, money reaching actually the destination it was intended to reach. So the Ministry of Finance has also been very active in going through reports and picking up on issues. And finally, for UNICEF and our partner, the Ministry of Finance was very critical in facilitating a national level dialogue where various organizations that work in the field of budget tracking and social accountability come together to share what emerges out of the work done at community level. That was the first point. The second point is that we have realized there's increasingly strong demand from members of parliament or members of district councils in this work. Because very typically in a country such as Zambia, members of parliament or district officials, they do not have ready access to information, not even budget information. And this initiative provided them with information and also provided them with feedback from their constituencies. And they were very interested, and they are very interested in using it, although they put a lot of pressure on the need for them to have real-time and digestible information. They find the approach a little bit complex. They want readily packaged information, and they want information that relates to the budget as it is implemented in this particular year, because the methodology used for the Deepening Accountability Program relates to the budget as it was sort of implemented in year one, and then it is tracked in year two, because then you can only see what happens in the communities. But members of parliament and members of district councils, they want real-time information, and we are thinking now with our partner on how to accommodate this. And it was already mentioned in previous presentations that technology may help us in that regard. I think I already mentioned members from district councils. Decentralization, we have discovered it's a real opportunity. And Zambia is a decentralizing country, although the process is very slow and takes years, and the approach as well, and they have taken their own initiatives. So that is what we believe a very positive development. And then the final point I wanted to raise is very much related to scale up. It is how can we institutionalize social accountability approaches. In Zambia, we have in particular been looking at the opportunities that the national planning and budget policy provides. There is a new national planning and budgeting policy that is not only focused on national level input into the budget process, but also on subnational and local level inputs. It's relatively vague, but we are looking at ways maybe in the coming years to influence revisions of this policy and even, translating it into an act or a law, how we can influence that process through the Ministry of Finance and our members of parliament that we work with to have more firm statements on citizen-based budgets in these policies. So these are some of the points I wanted to share, and I look forward to discussing these with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Excellent points, very important challenges and lessons that we need to discuss and unpack as we move forward trying to design effective social accountability initiatives. Some of you may have ideas, comments, questions to contribute to this a webinar discussion. We are now ready to open up the dialogue. You are more than welcome to do it sending us the questions. We have some already, and we will try to address them to the panelists as they come in. And maybe we can start with some of them. Mitra or Nicola, if you could already refer to some of those questions.
So we do have one question on social accountability in conflicts, situations of conflicts and crises. I'm guessing that might be a question for Restless development colleagues, and potentially our colleague Charlotte with the GPSA. So we can put that into one bucket. Then we have a question on young people's engagement, including those who are particularly marginalized and excluded, and how to ensure their meaningful engagement. So this is, in fact, the disability team at headquarters that recently also developed some guidance on this. So potentially we could also give the floor to Lieve to speak on this. And then we have our colleague Liz Gibbons, who has, I believe, a question to Zambia. She is speaking to the needed time in order to identify outcomes, and how the success of social accountability is also very context specific and also requires a lot of capacity development. So, so that's both a question to Zambia, but to the other colleagues as well. So I'd say at the moment, perhaps we start with those three. So there's the inclusiveness question from Lieve, there's the question on the context of crisis, and then from Liz, the challenge in terms of the capacity building that's required. And
I think that both are, I mean, both sets of questions are pointing out to how to work through challenges. Mainly the first one, how to ensure that we can have a more sustainable initiative in contexts where all the conditions may not be granted to move ahead with this, like conflict situations or a context where no resources is the panorama. So, and secondly, another challenge, how to make sure that we are indeed engaging people who are at the margins of technology and society. So maybe we can start with Restless Development's colleagues, and then come back to New York for Olav's reflections on this one. Victoria?
Yeah, thanks for that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so obviously we as Restless, we work in a couple of contexts that are you know, post-conflict. So we work in Sierra Leone and obviously in Karamoja as well. But what I wanted to briefly talk about is we recently did a study on young people's role in youth-led accountability, and as part of that did key informant interviews with people engaging in social accountability in more difficult environments. And one of the interesting things that came out around that is around some of the informal ways that citizens and young people in particular do already take part in accountability, but in a way that probably isn't ever packaged as a project or a program, and isn't funded and seen in that explicit way. So for example, the role of culture and so-called counterculture, the role of art, satire, music, street theatre, comedy, etc., that are ways that which citizens do take part in accountability, but in a way that probably isn't recognised and is often as well in a way that is obviously not supported by the government. So citizens obviously often putting themselves at risk doing that, but ways which been proven to be quite effective. For example, we spoke to a number of people in Egypt who had mentioned some of those mechanisms. We don't claim to have all the answers, but I think that's something that's interesting. In terms of youth engaging young people who are more marginalised, I think Titus would have some great insights on that. I think one of the things that we've, just to kind of before I hand over to him, one of the things that we found interesting is the role of young people. So often, for example, in the Big Idea, we are, in general, the young people who are directly engaging in the programme are, of course, literate. They do have, their basic needs met in order to be able to participate in something like this. However, by supporting young people to take up roles as, for example, intermediaries, so where they are the ones accessing the data, making it meaningful and making it more accessible for other people who are not literate, who don't have access to the same services, who are living in much more difficult contexts. Actually, young people can help provide that bridge to other more marginalised groups as part of these social accountability mechanisms. But perhaps if I can hand over to Titus, who obviously has a much more direct experience from his own work in Uganda on engaging young people. Titus, shall I hand over to you?
Are you? Yes, we can hear you, Titus. Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Actually, the point in terms of a challenge in terms of engaging, that is crucial to engage with young people and the children, but still like a challenge. But on a practical basis, the way we have been doing things is that, like for Restless Moment, in the Big Idea project, we usually try as much as we can is to make sure you put the young people right coming from the communities where they stay. So this means it does not limit in terms of participation, does not limit on those ones who are maybe disabled or something. And the fact that usually we give them opportunity to just share what they can be able to do and how best they can be able to share with the community and all those kind of things. And you will find that even like our youngest youth researcher is just 18 years old. So that means we really be very, very considerate that actually we make sure that it's both the people who are learned and the unlearned kind of youth, so that the kind of the knowledge they share and the way they relate in their team builds a very good ground for young people's participation. So you find like even in our kind of meetings, when we're having this consultation, the focus discussions, we hold them right at the point of convenience for the community people. So that's why we take the meeting. We make sure we have the meeting right there at the village level, and we sit wherever the LOC one and opinion leaders have actually accepted that this is the right place for you to sit. And then we make sure that we have the representation of whoever is in that village. So if a disabled person is there, then we have the person in the meeting. I think we happen to have some of them participate also in a Big Idea consultation. This was quite so good because it gives opportunity for everyone's voice to be heard. So that kind of a way is like the way we've been so quite so happy because we directly engage with them. And fact that when it comes to like bringing presentations, the young people always love to see that they are the ones leading, not other people like leading. You find like the way we're implementing the district youth working group meetings, it is still a young person to moderate the meeting, it's a young person to invite the other youth researchers to make the presentation, and that is quite so interesting. We happen to have the young girl of 18 years presenting at the district youth working group meeting in Napa district. And everyone, every stakeholder, every decision maker was just nodding their head. Yes, that's right. Oh, that's right. That's right. Meaning that really they also get like taken up when the young people are leading on the issues and just only asking them to create the environment for the young people's participation and also making sure that they work along with the young people on issues affecting them. And that is so key in terms of like involving the young people. Make sure they are directly leading. We know sometimes something can be maybe a little bit technical for them, but try to learn that that's a challenge and it's something you need to share with them and start at their point of understanding. That's the way we are doing it in the CDIGA project, and we are progressing quite well.
Thank you. That's a very concrete answer to start thinking how to remove some of the barriers that would impede that all those young people, not just a few of them, can engage in these initiatives. Let me try to ask here Olav, because one of the main challenges that are being posed by panelists and some of the questions is how to institutionalize social accountability, how to make sure that those initiatives go to scale and actually have some sustainability. And you started by saying that SDG is already a sort of movement. So in that regard, and within the context of the SDGs, what are the current ideas or platforms that will shape this monitoring framework for the SDGs, where all these social accountability initiatives can link up and indeed conform a very active and effective movement for action?
Thank you, Susana. That's a huge question. On the one hand, it's fantastic to have a universally agreed agenda. We know now what the goals and the targets are, and the agreed means of implementation that has to be mobilized to help deliver the agenda, and we know what has been agreed, although it's a bit generic in terms of and maybe also a little bit weak what has been agreed in terms of follow-up and review. But at least we do know what the mechanisms are at the global level, with a high-level political forum, with some form of reporting and reviewing happening at the global level. There will be similar exercises at the regional level, and all countries have committed to keeping track of progress at the country level. And then you have this beautiful statement in the outcome document about basically pledging to involve people to participate in tracking progress and ensuring accountability. So at that kind of general level, it's all in place. So I think what that means is that it's up to all of us as engaged UN agencies, as engaged civil society and other actors to figure out how can we make this happen. And I don't think there's going to be my personal view, there's not going to be a neat grand design here. It's going to be a bit messy, a bit experimental, a bit, pragmatic, move forward wherever there is an opportunity, opportunistic, move forward wherever there are opportunities. And we should, whether it's UNICEF or the World Bank or Restless Development or other actors, look for ways to team up around ways to make this happen in practice. And if there's a bit of competition, with different initiatives, I wouldn't worry too much about that, unless it leads to, breakdown. But I really think that we have we have huge opportunities here, leveraging some of the things we already have. But the question of how you scale up and ensure sustainability is, of course, a very big one. And I will not pretend I have the answers to that, but I will offer a kind of a starting proposition. And that is that sustainability depends most fundamentally on whether or not it's not the whole answer, I know, but it's very, very important. It depends on whether or not people are actually even aware of the agenda and their human rights in the first place. And I think we have to wake up and smell the flowers a bit on this, because yes, SDGs are a movement, and human rights have been around for decades, and they're fairly well known around the world. But still, I would guess that at least a couple of billion of people around the world, and particularly the most marginalized, they have no idea that they have rights, that they are entitled to dignity, that they are entitled to hold the powerful to account. They don't know that. Of course, there are risks involved once you know that. If those who are powerful don't want to be held to account, it can have consequences. But still, I think it's incredibly important to make a big push so that people actually know that their governments have signed off on this kind of agenda. They've also signed off on the human rights treaties. Most of them, certainly all but one, have signed off on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Mm-hmm. And just by actually knowing that and getting that awareness out there, you create the foundation for accountability that is truly sustainable. There will be setbacks, there will be pushback, there will be challenges in many places, but at least you have that foundation to build on. And then, yes, we can figure out, working with governments and working with parliaments and working with civil society organizations, how to build the structures for it. And there has to be accountability at local level, at national level, and of course then ultimately, if we can provide the right kind of platform, for formal accountability and social accountability at the global level.
Thank you, Olav. Yes, absolutely. This is not going to be a linear process of constructing a sort of a universal, global, and all-encompassing platform. We have here with us Shannon O'Sheen. She has been absolutely involved with UNICEF's presence and work with the SDGs agenda. So, Shannon, I would like to invite you to contribute also from that point of view.
Just a very quick comment, and it was, I believe, in the presentation from Zambia. What struck me was that when there was the challenges in only working in a few communities, but then when the communities that were next to these communities learned about it and decided to start it themselves. I think that's kind of the critical clicking point where communities see the value. And it's not necessarily because a UN agency or because an NGO is pushing this agenda and trying to kind of make it happen. It's because the community sees for itself the value. And that's when these things become sustainable and can be taken to scale. When the people that are in the community, whether it's the business leaders, the citizens, the local government, understand that this is a win for them, then they want to take the initiative and keep it going themselves. So I think that that's something that maybe as UNICEF and UN agencies, how do we help to catalyze and spread the word about things that are working so that communities take this on themselves?
Thank you, Shannon. I would like to invite Charlotte from the World Bank to comment also on this issue of sustainability and scaling up. How to make this happening in a way that is careful to not to shape things in a very directive way and allow for the organic engagement of communities themselves, but at the same time put the building blocks for those initiatives so that they can link back to institutions and ultimately get the results of holding accountable institutions accountable for development results. How is the World Bank thinking about this, and how do you see issues of sustainability and scaling up, Charlotte, from where you sit?
Yeah, thanks. That's yes, it is a big question. But I was inspired by Olav's comments earlier. I think it's also, when we look at social accountability and sort of almost that there are complex processes, but if we can find ways of having both the government actually being able to better deliver and the communities to see the gains in this, of course, that's a mutual incentive. The incentives start to become aligned, and that's the key that we've seen. And if I just may take the Philippines example, because I was there myself, so it's very easy to relate to, but where really there's a huge potential for working with the Ministry of Social Welfare And just by working with them and working differently to sort of get that empowerment going, that people actually start to take responsibility, or they start to actually get information that is actionable. For me, it's a lot to do with having actionable information at all levels. So instead of having someone come from the ministry to tell them once a month, these beneficiaries, these social cash transfer beneficiaries, to tell them that they have to send their children to school, which is not empowering at all. You have a process where they do the monitoring themselves together with their parent leader. They also do a review of schools, so they are involved in the scorecarding mechanism as well. So they are involved in actually going to check on which textbooks were received, etc. So they become much more active, if you like, owners of this process. At the same time as the ministry, the local social worker from the Ministry of Local Social Welfare becomes more a facilitator in working with the local authorities in trying to get some of these sort of agreements of improvement in place. So I would say, I would echo the need to have this being kind of organically driven and almost a culture shift, because even if they were told about their, apparently these beneficiaries were told about their human rights, and we had sessions on the rights of the children and their own health rights and the right to development. But that's not so actionable until you put it into practice. And I think that's the strength of trying out this approach of actually making it actionable, not just for one subset of actors involved, but everyone, including us as a donor community, including the World Bank.
Thank you, Charlotte. Just approaching the end of this conversation, I would like to address also a question posed by Liz Gibbons regarding the UNICEF's intention of waving in this social accountability way of working in all our endeavors. Particularly, she was interested in hearing from us regarding our engagement in middle-income countries, upstream work. And I think that because the universality of this agenda, what we are trying to do is to see the ground for this type of initiatives, not only in low-income countries or middle-income, but actually across different country contexts. And therefore, it's key as part of the demand side, so to speak, of our work in terms of empowering children, young people, adolescents and their communities, but also contributing to opening up better grounds for participation. And that has been going on for quite some time in UNICEF, the type of initiatives that were from a rights-based approach aimed at having both duty bearers and right holders capacitated and empowered in terms of demanding improved accountability of rights. I think that right now the new elements, if you wish, in this landscape are given because of the prominence of this idea of social accountability and accountability in general by this new development agenda, which give us new opportunities to move forward with this, but also the new advances in terms of technology that give us opportunities to engage in generating different types of information and data that can be used to really hold duty bearers accountable. So I think that right now the two levels of accountability that Olav was mentioning, the one that has been around for quite some time, provided by the human rights architecture, international architecture, but now a new accountability framework that has been just given to the international community by the new development agenda can be leveraged together in a new and more innovative way so that we can really see and open up these opportunities without really having or ignoring all the challenges, particularly that our colleague Paul has very clearly pointed out to. And speaking of Paul, I would like to get back to him and give it, 20 minutes before we wrap up this discussion. Could you please, Paul, come up and comment or share with us your reflections?
Yeah. Thank you, Susanna. I think big idea and small steps, that is I think one of the things that I keep in mind. Just two maybe smaller observations of things I think we should not forget. And we often look for an initiative where we would like people to give people a voice, ask their feedback, we ask their inputs, we want them to participate. But sometimes we realize we forget them to give them feedback about what happened with that information we collected from them, what happened with the recommendation they formulated. Now, we owe that to them, otherwise people will lose trust in the type of tools we develop with them, but we only extract and we don't give back. The second, maybe smaller observation, is that in communities with very high levels of poverty and low levels of service provision, people can also be afraid. We need to provide a protective environment for people to voice their concerns and their feedback, because people may also be afraid there may be repercussions when they express themselves about the quality of a service or a budget not reaching their school, for instance. Now, finally, on the issue of scale-up, I think we need to, as UNICEF, invest in long-term partnerships with mostly civil society organizations around these initiatives. Sometimes we believe that the one-year pilot can already lead in year 2 to scale up. I don't think that is the case. It's a long haul, and we need to be patient. Technology can perhaps help, but we need to work that out better how. And then finally, in middle income countries, yes, this type of work downstream can definitely be helpful for our upstream advocacy. I think it makes it much more powerful when we bring voices and experiences from the communities to the national level to inform our advocacy and upstream policy work. So these were just a few reactions on the points raised. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's an excellent set of final reflections. And we do need to keep in mind that information, it's only that when it is not actionable, and people can see the result of gathering information in terms of concrete changes in services, programs, etc. Thank you to the panelists for sharing their expertise and experience with us today. Thank you to all participants for your valuable comments and questions. Our team has taken good note of any question we were unable to respond today, and will soon circulate a Q&A document responding to these queries, along with a link to all PowerPoint presentations and the video of today's discussion and the previous webinar. We wish you happy holidays and hope you will be able to join us in the new year for part 3 of our webinar series on accountability, which we hope will focus on, again, a more formal, this time international global form of accountability, focusing on the reporting process under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Thank you to all again, and we'll see you hopefully next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.